Welcome to the next edition of BriefingsDirect. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator. The use of containers by developers and now increasingly IT operators has grown from infatuation to deep and abiding love. But as with any long-term affair, the honeymoon soon leads to needing to live well together and maybe even getting some relationship help along the way. And so it goes with container orchestration and automation solutions, which are rapidly emerging as the means to maintain the bliss between container adoption and broad container use and scaling among multiple clouds. Today's BriefingsDirect Cloud Services maturity discussion focuses on new ways to gain container orchestration, use serverless models, and employ inclusive management to keep the container love alive. Here to help unpack the new era of using containers and gaining ease in multi-cloud deployments, please join me now in welcoming our panel. We're here with Matt Baldwin. He's founder and CEO of StackPoint Cloud, and they're based in Seattle. Welcome, Matt.
How are you?
I'm great. We're also here with Nick Jackson. He's developer advocate at HashiCorp, and they're based in San Francisco. Hello, Nick.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. We're also here with Reynold Harbin, Director of Product Marketing at DigitalOcean, and they're based in New York. Hello, Reynold.
Hi, Dina. Thanks for having us.
Delighted to have you with us. Nick, let's start with you. HashiCorp has gone a long way to enable multi-cloud provisioning. What are some of the trends, as you see it, now driving the need for multi-cloud? And how does container management and orchestration fit into the goal of attaining a real multi-cloud use or even interoperability?
So one of the things that we see, and we see a lot of this from a sort of mainly from our enterprise customers, is that people are looking for a number of different things. So they're sort of conscious that they maybe don't want to get locked into one particular cloud provider. They're looking for high availability and redundancy across cloud providers. They may also be looking for kind of a migration path, and that could be a migration path from like a private cloud to a public cloud, or they kind of want a burstable capacity, which means that they can take their private cloud and burst it out into public cloud if need be. I think containers and sort of orchestration platforms like Kubernetes, Nomad, and Swarm, they kind of give a standard interface to the developers. So once you've got the platform set up, the sort of the running an application is in some extent cloud agnostic.
And so there's a great deal of need for getting container management and orchestration into the mainstream, more standardized as not only a means for development, but potentially as a greasing the skids, if you will, to a multi-cloud world.
Yes, if you make the investment now to architect and package your applications with containers and intelligent orchestration, you'll have a lot more or a lot better agility to move your application across cloud providers. And this will enable you to quickly leverage any new products on any cloud provider. For example, recently DigitalOcean launched our high CPU droplet plans, providing some of the best values for accessing the latest chips from Intel. And users that have containerized their applications with orchestration, they could easily improve application performance by moving some of those workloads over to that new product.
And you all have created a universal control plane for Kubernetes. Matt, tell us a little bit about how that enables multi-cloud as well. How does that fit in to what we're discussing in terms of ease of deployment and more choice in cloud use?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've basically built a management control plane for Kubernetes that gives you a single pane of glass across all your cloud providers. We deal with the top four, so Amazon, Azure, Google, and DigitalOcean. And we provide, as I said, a single pane of glass. You can build and manage the clusters at any of those providers, and you can also stand up federation. So in Kubernetes, multi-cloud is done via what's called federation. And so we created an easy-use way of standing up federation, the federation control plane, and connecting all those clusters together. Also a way of managing workload and being able to balance workload across. Say if you want to have some workload on Amazon, some workload on DigitalOcean, you can actually do that. So that's kind of what we've been doing with our product. I mean, we're still on that time, we're still on that journey, still building more things as, things evolve. The Kubernetes project is moving quite fast. Federation is shifting and changing So we're just keeping pace with that and trying to make it really easy to use. So our whole point is usability. We think all this tooling needs to become really, really easy to use. You need to be able to manage multi-cloud as if it's a single cloud.
Right. Reynold, with DigitalOcean being one of those major cloud providers that Matt mentioned, why is it important for you all to see this level of multi-cloud use? Is this a matter of sort of letting the best public cloud services and value win? Why do you want to see these floodgates be open for choice and interoperability?
Thousands of businesses and over 1 million developers use DigitalOcean, primarily because of the ease in provisioning and being able to spin up and manage their infrastructure. And this next step of having orchestration tools and containers puts even more flexibility into the hands of developers and businesses. For customers who want to use data centers on DigitalOcean or data centers on other providers, we want to enable flexibility. We want developers to more easily burst into public clouds as they need from their private infrastructure and give them the same level of visibility so they can see in a common way what's happening across those various infrastructure providers.
And I'll open this up to anyone on the panel. If IT operators are interested in a serverless model where they let the clouds manage the allocation of machine resources, this also helps simplicity, it helps cost optimization. Do the container orchestration and management tools help? How does serverless and the demand for it also fit into what we're discussing?
I think serverless actually adds a really extra layer of complexity because the different sort of cloud providers have a various sort of different approach to doing serverless. So like a serverless function that you're running on Google or Azure or on AWS, they've all got different interfaces. They've all got different ways of deploying and kind of to get the underlying code to be abstract enough that it can run across all different providers. I think you've got to really, really sort of think about that from a software architectural perspective. So in my opinion, a lot of it is kind of like you allow yourself to get locked in. So you use things like the native queuing or PubSub, which works really, really well with that particular cloud provider's serverless platform. One of the sort of projects which I've seen coming about recently, which I'm super excited about, is OpenFaaS by Alex Ellis. And what OpenFaaS tries to do is it tries to provide that sort of cloud agnostic method of running functions as a service. So this is not necessarily serverless. You've still got to manage the underlying servers, but what it does is it allows you to take advantage of your existing Kubernetes or your Nomad or your existing Docker Swarm cluster, and it gives you the developer workflow, which I think is the ultimate end goal for me, rather than sort of thinking about the decoupling the complexity of the infrastructure, which I think serverless adds different complexity that sort of managing a scheduler does.
Reynold, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, I feel like we're kind of on this road of making it easier for the application developer to not worry about the underlying infrastructure. And I think for certain applications, serverless can help in that goal. But at the same time, you're adding some complexity. You have to think about the application and the architecture and which services are going to be most useful in terms of applying serverless. So we want to enable our developers to use whatever technologies will help them the most. And for certain applications, I think serverless will be relevant. And I think that the OpenFaaS stuff is really interesting because I think it does make it easier to write basically to one standard and not have to worry about the underlying, virtual servers or cloud providers.
And I think the other neat thing about OpenFaaS is the maintainability. So looking at, I think when you look at application lifecycle management, which is not enough people pay too much attention to it, yet so many developers complain about technical debt. But application lifecycle management, you kind of don't really know so much with the serverless platforms because they're constantly evolving. But with OpenFaaS, one of the things that I love about that platform is that you're basically baking functions into Docker containers. So you could run those as standard microservices outside of the OpenFaaS platform if you wanted. So it gives you that kind of that maintainability. It gives you that sort of upgrade path. And again, you're completely decoupled from any particular cloud provider's platform, so that you've got the flexibility. And again, you want to go multi-cloud, you can run OpenFaaS on a federated Nomad or a federated Kubernetes cluster, and you've got your own private multi-cloud functions as a service, which I think is like super cool.
Sounds as if we'd like to see the same trajectory we saw with containers take place with serverless. There's just a bit of a lag there in terms of the interoperability and the extensibility.
Well, I'd say there's also the serverless framework that you can use that kind of helps to try to abstract out the various serverless endpoints. So, abstract out Lambda or Kubeless or any of the others, Fission. Kubeless and Fission are just two other projects that are more geared towards Kubernetes than others.
Well, we heard from Matt a little bit about his organization there at StackPoint Cloud. Nick, take a few moments and tell us about your organization, HashiCorp. What are you all up to?
So we're all about delivering developer tooling which enables modern applications. So we've got products like Nomad, which is a scheduler, Terraform for infrastructure as code, Consul, which you can use for key value configurations, service discovery, Packer for creating sort of Goldmaster images, and Vault, which is sort of heavily becoming very, very popular for managing secrets and things like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put this suite of products together which work really, really well if you use them together, so that we can make the integration super easy, but they actually work so well as standalone as well. So you could just run Terraform if you want to, or maybe you're just going to use Nomad and Consul, or maybe Consul and Vault. But the aim is that we want to simplify a lot of the problems that people have when they start building highly available, highly distributed, sort of scalable infrastructure.
Very good. Reynold, to you, tell us a bit, if you will, about DigitalOcean, and perhaps why you're interested in supporting organizations like StackPoint Cloud and HashiCorp so that they can better provide services and value to their end customers.
Sure. So DigitalOcean essentially is a very intuitive cloud services platform to run applications, and we're really designed to help developers and businesses build their applications, deploy them and scale them faster and more efficiently and more cost effectively. And our products basically are cloud servers with various configurations to maximize CPU or memory available in data centers around the world. We also have storage, including object storage for unlimited scale or block storage, so you can attach a volume of any size really to your servers. And then we also include networking services for securing and scaling from firewalling to load balancing your applications. And all of these products really are designed to be controlled either through a simplified UI or through a very simple API, a RESTful API, so that tools like Terraform or Kubernetes orchestration through StackPoint Cloud can all be done through the single pane of glass of your choice, and the infrastructure that underlies it's all controlled via the API. And the reason that we're leaning into these kinds of partnerships and tooling is because that's really what our users want, what developers want. They want easier ways to provision and manage infrastructure. So if you want to use an orchestration tool, then we want to make that as easy and seamless as possible.
Well, great. So as I mentioned, the infatuation with containers has moved into the full love affair level, at least based on what I see in the market. But, how do we keep this from going off the rails? Because we've seen other cases where popularity can lead to some complexity. Maybe, for example, with the way virtual machines were adopted to a point where sprawl became such an issue. So what are some of the challenges that we're facing, and how can organizations better prepare themselves for a world of more containers and perhaps a world of more serverless? Let's start with you, Matt.
I think containers actually. I agree that containers are going to introduce a lot of complexity. I'll just dig into one piece of complexity, which is security is going to be a lot more complex. Now instead of trying to protect one host talking to another host, you need to figure out how do you protect one service talking to another service. So you're going to be looking, and then, so how do you secure that? How do you encrypt that traffic? How do you ensure that, identity is handled, and so, you're starting looking at other pieces of the puzzle, which are like things like service meshes. So, like we look at things like Kubernetes and Istio as two complementary things that go together because you're going to need to be able to observe these environments. You're going to be able to do all the things that you would have done with VMs, but just at more abundance of these things. And that's kind of what we're seeing. And that's the level of complexity. The tooling is still trying to catch up to that, and a lot of the open source tools like Istio is, still in alpha. Some of the components are still in alpha. There's a lot of need around ease of use around these tools, a lot of need for user interfaces. But we're at the beginning where, yes, we're trying to handle containers and lots of containers all over the place and trying to figure out how these things are talking to each other and being able to just troubleshoot that. How do you trace, when your application starts to have an issue, how do you figure out within that, where in that environment is that issue showing up, so you start to learn how to use tools like Zipkin, or you introduce open tracing into your stack, things like that.
And Matt, what would you encourage people to do now? Experiment with more tools, acquaint themselves with those tools, make demands on tools. How to maybe head off this from a user perspective?
I would begin by I think stepping into the water by going into small side of the pool, the shallow end of the pool by just starting to explore the technology. I've seen organizations kind of jump into these technologies, like take Kubernetes as an example. I saw an organization adopt Kubernetes really early, and then they kind of started to build their own path on top of it without actually being involved in the project and being aware of what's happening in the project, so that there's the danger of duplicating things that are happening in the roadmap. Like duplicating something that's in the roadmap that will be done in 6 months in the project, and now you have to figure out how do you, now you're stuck on Kubernetes version 1.2. How do you move to the next version of Kubernetes? So I think there's a danger there with too early of adoption if you start to build too much. But I think there's a need to do POCs, proof of concepts, start to shift, some of your smaller services over to K8s. I think you need to introduce Istio into test environments and start to look at what that does for you, and start looking at all the use cases around it. Things like traffic shifting. There's issues around like how do you, if you want to do an A/B deployment, Istio actually, Service Mesh can actually give you that, and start to play with that and start to plan for the future, but maybe not completely start to customize whatever you just built, because there's always a threat that, the project isn't fully baked yet, especially with Istio, like the API interfaces aren't fully there yet. So if you start to build, say, user interface, you're going to be refactoring a lot.
Right. Sounds like it might be time to be thinking strategic as well as tactical in how you approach these things, maybe even get some enterprise architects involved so that you don't get too bogged down in the instances. All right. Same question to you, Nick. What do you see as the challenges going forward with bringing containers to use in a multi-cloud environment perhaps, and what should people be thinking about to sort of maybe hedge against those challenges?
So I think we first got to look at just how fast things have moved. I mean, Kubernetes as a product practically didn't exist 2 years ago. Nomad didn't really exist 2 years ago. I think it was only just launched at HashiConf in 2015. And I think both of those sort of products are evolving, and I think it was a really sort of good comment that you've got to be careful about building on top of these things and then sort of straying too far away from the kind of the stable branch where you end up in a situation that you can't follow an upgrade path. Because one thing that's for certain is that the speed of evolution isn't going to slow down. So I think one of the kind of the key mantras should be to always sort of try to keep abreast of where the technology is and always make sure you've got that upgrade path. So I think you can do that through just being sensible about abstraction. So in the same way that you would sort of not necessarily depend on a concrete implementation in your code, you would depend on interfaces. I think you've got to kind of take a similar approach to your infrastructure. So we should be looking at depending upon interfaces so that if a new component comes along, something that's better than Kubernetes or Istio or something like that, that we can actually hot swap them out without having to go through years and years of replatforming.
Very good. Reynolds, same to you. Where do you see complexity or challenges in the evolution of these technologies and their adoption, and ways that early adopters might be thinking to make sure that they don't get bogged down and they can continue to mature?
Well, I think the two main points that Matt and Nick have brought up are really good ones. I think certainly visibility and security of these applications and these environments is really important from a kind of functionality perspective. I also think, though, as Nick mentioned, the pace at which new technologies are being developed, I think you have to have an environment where you can test out these various tools, see what works for you, do it in a way that's you can kind of get these ideas and run them and test them and see how this technology can help your particular business. And a lot of this infrastructure in many ways is it's almost viewed as disposable because you can spin it up as you need it to test it out, spin it down, and it might only need to live for an hour or so as you test it out, or or several hours or days. So I think being aware of the tools, what's happening in terms of new functionality, and then being able to test that either locally or in a cloud environment is really going to be important.
Well, I was sort of expecting at least one of you to bring up the DevOps word, right? That perhaps thinking about the development in conjunction with production, that making this a more seamless process would help. Am I off base? Matt, should DevOps be part of this solution set?
I think a lot of the tooling, yes, should be part of it. I guess my personal opinion on DevOps is that we're moving more towards ops needs to become more and more invisible. It's more about just dev and shipping, and it's more about focusing on the apps versus the infrastructure. And so, I just see, I just kind of see more like the capital O going to lowercase o, I guess is how I'm looking at it right now. Where what I do think is interesting, where I find it interesting right now is that developers and operators are now speaking in the same. If you're looking at Kubernetes, developers and operators are now speaking in the same language. They're speaking in Kubernetes, and so that's a very big deal. So now the developer's building it in the same way that the operator's going to understand it. The operator's going to understand how the microservice is built. The developer's going to understand how it's built. They're all going to understand everything, and then with multi-cloud, we could. You could also do things like you'd have staging you could have your staging environment in one cloud, and you can promote your code, so your operators are running, the code over in production on another provider, and you can promote that code across, that workload across. So you can do things like that too. But I think there's some of the traditional DevOps tooling, things like Chef, things like Puppet, I don't think have as much of a future as they used to have, because they did a lot of app management on the hosts, and now that the apps are not living on the hosts anymore, there's not a lot for those tools to do. So they're mostly, just build out a host at Amazon and then just deploy Kubernetes, and then just, let Kubernetes take over from there. So I think some of those tools will, their importance will lessen. Like you won't have to know Puppet as much. You likely won't ever need to know Puppet.
Nick, you're in the same camp, more dev, less ops, lowercase o?
I think it depends. So I think it depends on two things. And I think the first thing is the scale of your organization. I think when you look at a lot of tools and you look at a lot of sort of information that's out there, it kind of makes an assumption that everybody is operating Netflix scale. And I don't think that's the case. I think there's a lot of, pretty much any business that's operating in an electronic world, which is pretty much any business these days, can take advantage of modern development techniques. So I think when you start sort of depending on the scale, then it also shifts who is potentially going to be doing the sort of the infrastructure side of things. Smaller companies, I think you're going to get more dev than you will ops, because I think there's maybe not a scale that can support dedicated operations teams. But larger enterprise organizations, then you may have more of a platform team, which is more of a sort of an operations person who's using code to manage infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But I think in either case, there's a requirement that developers have to have an appreciation and an understanding of the platform to which they're deploying their code to. And they need to have that because they need to have an understanding of how things like service discovery works. How are the volumes working for persistent storage? How are things going to work in terms of scale and scalability? So if you're going to be load testing it, what are the sort of the operational thresholds in terms of I/O for CPU or disk and things like that? So I don't know. I think DevOps is a really powerful concept. I certainly love working in a world where I can interact and I can sort of work with the sort of the operations and the infrastructure teams, because I think I benefit as a software engineer, and I think the infrastructure engineers benefit because there's sort of skills that we both have that we can share. So I really hope DevOps doesn't go away, but I think the level at which that interaction occurs does very much depend on the scale of your organization.
All right, well, moving along a little bit in our conversation, I think I'd like to hit on some examples so we could demonstrate what we've been talking about before we look to the future and then close out. So if we could come up with sort of a quintessential example of some organization, large or small, that's embraced containers, has multi-cloud well in their sights, maybe thinking about serverless. Maybe we can't name them, maybe we can, but maybe show us rather than tell us how this would work and what they get from it. What are the business benefits of doing this well? Let's start with you, Matt.
So I've got an example. So the one customer that we worked with was they were full-on Amazon shop, and they were running. They had not migrated to microservices, and their first step was to basically they moved up to Docker, and they had a Docker compose, and then we moved them up to Kubernetes. And once they were on Kubernetes, so these guys were an ad tech firm, and they had. As you can imagine, their ingress traffic had a high charge to it, right? And that was billed by Amazon. So they spent a lot of time negotiating a better price point with Google. And what they were able to do is stand up a Kubernetes cluster at Google and then shift the workload that needed that basically that price point was attached to. They shifted that workload over to Google while keeping the rest of the workload at Amazon, because they were still relying on some of the other underlying PaaS features of Amazon, things like RDS. So they didn't want to completely move to Google, but they wanted to move something that they were taking a really large hit on cost with and move that to Google. So I think you're going to see multi-cloud kind of first get used with almost as a vendor tactic against the cloud providers to try to negotiate a better price point. So if you're doing ad tech, now you are in a position where you can actually negotiate with Amazon, Google, or whomever, and get a better price and just move your workload to whomever gives it to you. So that makes it a lot more competitive. And that was an early example. That was actually one of the earlier Federation examples we have. We also seen customers doing.
No, I was going to say the economic paybacks from that could be very significant. If you can leverage better deals from your cloud providers, that could be a very significant portion of your overall expenses.
Yeah, it's kind of I like to look at it as it's kind of giving the power back to the consumer, because if you really want to break down the cloud provider world, we basically have a monopoly and a smaller one. So we have Amazon as monopoly, and so how do you work against Amazon to reduce the price points? How do you kind of try to break that? And once you start to give power back to the consumer, that starts to weaken the monopolistic hold on the end user.
Yep. Nick, an example that we could look to, perhaps in a different way, that it provides a business advantage. Yeah,
so I think one of the things that we see from a lot of enterprise customers is this cloud adoption phase. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but the sort of the total market in terms of compute that The big four cloud providers, well, hold is around about 30%. There's something like sort of about 60 to 70% of all of the existing compute is still running in private data centers. And a lot of organizations are looking at moving that forward. So they want to be able to adopt cloud. So they for whatever reason that is. So they can use the tooling to be able to do that. So from the previous example, you can create a federated Kubernetes cluster or a federated Nomad cluster, and you can start shifting your workload away from the sort of the private data center and out into the cloud. So you've got that sort of clear migration path. You've got the capability that it allows you to run both of those platforms side by side, the existing platform that the organization understands, but the sort of the modern platform which requires a bit of learning, and that's not just learning in terms of tooling, but it's kind of learning in terms of behavior. And I think that's going to be a sort of a fairly sort of typical approach that a lot of the large enterprises are taking. I think we're going to see a lot of this shift from these private data centers into cloud. And I think a lot of the cloud providers are actually offering pretty attractive reasons in terms of licensing to be able to do that. And rather than renew your license for your physical tin, why don't you just move it off into our cloud provider? So if you're running tens of billions of dollars worth of business, then downtime is incredibly expensive. So you want to ensure that you've got the maximum high availability.
I'd say that you're seeing that with like Microsoft is converting a lot of their enterprise agreements to move people over to Azure.
Well, it's not just Microsoft. I mean, I think Dell EMC are one of the most aggressive. So I know Dell EMC have got their cloud product, and I mean, I don't know for certain, but I could imagine that a great sales strategy for them is to say, well, hey, rather than buying a new Dell server, why don't you just lease one of these servers in Dell Cloud, and we will manage it for you, and you basically just shifting from an OPEX into a CAPEX, or did I get that the wrong way around? But and I think Oracle have got a similar strategy. Oracle Cloud is up and coming, so the potential to, rather than paying for Oracle database licenses, you could just move that database into the Oracle Cloud and then save yourself a lot of trouble around the maintenance of the physical tin. So I think that it's attractive for a number of organizations to try and use that as a sales.
Reynold, any thoughts on examples of how orchestration of containers, maybe moving more towards serverless models, have great benefits for your end users? As a public cloud, where do you see a good example of how this all works to everyone's advantage?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as developers kind of move towards containers and orchestration, they can start looking at cloud providers not as a choice of either or, but as I get to use all of them, and I get to use the products and services that are best for my particular application. So an example of that would be a customer that was hosting their application and their storage on Amazon. And, a month ago, DigitalOcean released our new object storage product called Spaces, and it's essentially all the benefits of S3 object storage, but the cost is 10x lower, at least for bandwidth. So this particular customer, with a containerized application that basically, publishes and posts content to object storage and delivers a lot of that to end users, if they could containerize that application, they would have the flexibility to take advantage of, these new products that are being rolled out all the time by various cloud providers. In this case, they could have, easily moved their application to DigitalOcean, take advantage of our new object storage product, and essentially lower the cost. But it's not DigitalOcean products. New technologies that can make your applications better are being released all the time as open source projects and commercial products. companies will gain agility if their applications are containerized, as they'll be able to use new technologies much more easily.
I was going to just add to that and say there's some great abstraction layers, like things like Minio, so you don't necessarily need to interact with the underlying object storage. You've got a sort of a layer which sort of allows you to be ignorant of that, and that decoupling is super useful.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we're about out of time, but I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to tell us how to learn more about your organization and also perhaps follow your own postings if you're on Twitter or you're blogging regularly. Matt Baldwin, how can people follow you and also learn more about StackPoint Cloud?
Sure. So if you wanted to give Kubernetes a shot, with Istio, we provide basically a turnkey marketplace and easy management platform for that. So you just hit the site, log in with DigitalOcean credentials, and then you can start to build clusters at DO with Istio on there. You can check us out. We have blog.stackpoint.io. We also run all the major markets for the Kubernetes community up and down the West and East Coast. So you can engage with us at any of the Kubernetes events in Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and whatever. We also just drop in a Kubernetes Slack channel and just ping us. Ping me on Baldwin Matthew. Also Baldwin Matthew on Twitter.
Nick, same thing. How can people follow you and learn more about HashiCorp?
HashiCorp.com is a great landing site because there you can bounce out to the various product sites from there. We've also got a blog which we're pretty active with. We're generally publishing at least a couple of pieces of information ourselves on there every week, but we're also syndicating other stuff that we find not necessarily always relational to HashiCorp, but just interesting technology things. So you can sort of get access to the blog through there, and on Twitter following HashiCorp and myself, I'm Sheriff Jackson, so you can follow me on Twitter. I try to share stuff that I find interesting. And yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff. I think Hacker News is always worthwhile, avoiding comments obviously, but it's a great place where information can get surfaced as well.
And Reynold, learning more about DigitalOcean as well as following you or other evangelists that you think are worthy.
Yeah, I think, the community site on DigitalOcean has 1,700 or so really well-curated articles. So do.co/community would be a good start. We've got several really technology-agnostic articles about containerization as well as some specific technologies like Kubernetes, just articles that are well-written and will teach you just how you can kind of get started. And then, of course, the DigitalOcean website is a good resource as well just for our own products. I don't blog a ton myself, so I would suggest that you follow the DigitalOcean community as probably a better resource.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on container orchestration and automation solutions as a means to encourage broader adoption of containers and multi-cloud use. We've learned about new ways to gain container control. We've also heard about serverless and discussed some of the models around DevOps in order to grease the skids towards more inclusive cloud deployments and development. So I'd like to thank our guests. We've been here with Matt Baldwin, the founder and CEO of StackPoint Cloud, based in Seattle. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks.
We've also been here with Nick Jackson, developer advocate at HashiCorp, based in San Francisco. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Reynold Harbin, director of product marketing at DigitalOcean, based in New York, has also joined us. Thank you so much, Reynold.
Great. Thanks, Dana.
I am Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArber Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing series of BriefingsDirect discussions. A big thank you to our sponsor, DigitalOcean, for supporting these presentations. Follow me on Twitter at Dana_Gardner and find more podcasts at BriefingsDirect.com. Thanks again for joining. Please pass this content along to your IT community and do come back next time.